especially if you're a high school athlete who needs to gain strength. Don't mess around with the fancy accessory movements. Get very good at the basics, and then get a coach. Get somebody who knows what they're doing, whether it's just somebody who's writing you a program or going over some video. Get a coach, because these athletes need the structure. Now we're expecting these high school kids to do this on their own, or dads or teachers or things like that to figure it out. And yes, there's a lot of information out there, but if you hire a coach or you pay somebody to do it for you, you're going to see a much bigger benefit.
Welcome to the Train with Xan podcast,
where our goal is to help you look, feel, and perform like an athlete.
In each episode, we're interviewing experts in training, nutrition, and sports performance
who will help you separate fact from fiction in the fitness industry.
Now, here's your host, a former professional athlete,
certified personal trainer, and nutrition coach,
Xan Barksdale.
Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Xan Barksdale. I'm your host. Thanks for tuning in to episode number 6 of the Train with Xan podcast. Have a really good show today lined up. As most of you guys probably know, I have a background in baseball. I played growing up, played in college, played professionally. And that's where a lot of my love for fitness and the weight room and training and nutrition has stemmed from. And it's absolutely amazing how much the training has changed from the time that I was in high school and a professional athlete not too long ago to what it's become today. And on today's show, I'm interviewing Kyle Rogers, who is the lead strength trainer at Driveline Baseball. He does all their strength and training, makes their programs, and we'll go into more detail during the show of what he does. But it's amazing how things have advanced and how things have changed. And I think you'll find really interesting what they're doing and what they're doing at Driveline in particular, but really what's going on in the world of baseball and sports in general as it pertains to athletic development. So, again, really good show lined up for you today. Again, this is episode number 6. You can find the links and show notes and all the information that you would want to find at trainwithxan.com/006. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into the interview.
Let's get this party started in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Train with Xan podcast. Super excited about the guest we have on today. This is a guy who's the lead strength trainer for Driveline Baseball, and a lot of you who are listening to this, you followed me and you follow this podcast because of baseball, so the name Driveline is very familiar to you. They are on the cutting edge of what's going on in the baseball with a data-driven approach. They take a very scientific approach to things, and they have a lot of really smart people there. He's also a certified strength and conditioning specialist, a former college pitcher. So with that said, let's welcome Kyle Rogers to the show.
Hey, man. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and talking with us a little bit about training some baseball athletes.
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to getting into it.
Let's go ahead and get started. I think the first thing I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you is, one, how did you get interested in, the sport or the strength training part to begin with? And then we'll kind of move into how you got to Driveline and where you are now in your current role. But I'd love to hear just, what got you curious? How'd you get started? And what kind of led you to where you are now?
Yeah, so I played college baseball. Out of high school, I went to a local junior college in the area. I was kind of the epitome of that low 80s pitcher who, quote unquote, knew how to pitch. But apparently that doesn't make it at the next level. So I was cut from that junior college. I had to transfer to a school called Green River Community College that was in the same conference. My coaches were actually Tanner Swanson and Billy Boyer. They're actually two pretty well-known coaches in the Minnesota Twins organization right now. But, basically because my velocity was such an issue for me, I really started to try and use the weight room as a means to gain velocity. And the problem was I just didn't really know how to train. And so when I transferred to Green River, they pretty much told me that, I could come in, I would probably slot towards the bottom of their depth chart. They had 5 to 7 guys who were just like me. And so they gave me the option of transitioning into a sidearm pitcher. And so I like to think I have a little bit of baseball savvy, and I knew what that meant. It meant basically I got to learn to throw sidearm or my baseball career's over. So I transitioned into a sidearm pitcher, and I'm very thankful for my college baseball career. You know, I had a fairly successful career, but I always wanted to learn how to throw harder, how to train to throw harder. And so I think when I was in college, I started to kind of use strength as a hobby. And I always knew that I would be a better coach than I was a player. And so I wanted to become a strength coach to help people who are kind of in the same position as I was and help teach them how to train properly and how to gain velocity so that they can prolong their baseball careers.
A really good answer and a lot of interesting points there. And, you know, the way that amateur and professional baseball is moving, and one thing I've noticed, it seems like just the baseball world in general is placing less and less emphasis now on, you know, maybe your success on the field versus what you can do. Like, I know for me personally, I had a much more highlighted career as a coach than a player, and it seems like a lot of guys are in the same boat where maybe they didn't have the greatest playing career ever, but, you know, good players, but didn't play at the highest level, but they're getting an opportunity to coach at the highest level because of their knowledge. And I feel like a lot of that is the drive, like you said, from really having to put everything you got into focusing your efforts on your education and the information and not just getting by based off pure athletic ability. So I feel like you're in the same boat as a lot of guys who are really doing well and succeeding in the coaching world right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like the average to below average players, I feel like just make better coaches because they've always had to kind of explore every opportunity to improve. Where like the most elite level athletes don't really know what makes them elite. Whereas like, you know, somebody who's in a similar position as me, you know, if I make a change in my training or I do something differently and I see a spike from that, or I see, you know, the opposite, you know, I can track that down as something that worked for me or something that, you know, might work for somebody else.
Absolutely. Now, so when you got interested in it, was this what you studied in college or was this all done kind of on the side?
Yeah, it was kind of on the side. So after I played junior college, I transferred to a Division II school in North Carolina called Belmont Abbey College. And like most, I won't say most, but like some college athletes, you know, you place emphasis in different areas when you're choosing a school to go to. And for me, it was like I had an offer from a Division II school in North Carolina, and then I had two other offers from like an NAIA school in Kansas and then another NAIA school in the Midwest. And so it was like, do I want to go to the Carolinas? Do I want to go to the Midwest? And at the time, Belmont Abbey was, you know, 2 years removed from like a trip to the College World Series and, you know, had some success. And so I looked more at like the baseball side of things, the location of the country and things like that. And as opposed to kind of like what education do they offer, which probably was more important. And so while I had interest in strength conditioning, they didn't have like a kinesiology program or an exercise science program. And so I kind of just went and was like, you know, I guess I'll do sport management and see what happens. And, you know, my senior year, it's getting close to graduation and I don't really know, I don't have anything lined up. I don't really know what I'm going to do. And so I kind of put together a plan to figure out, you know, how I could get my CSCS and, you know, who I could potentially train, where I could work, things like that. And so actually, when I got out of college, I had two part-time jobs. One was a part-time job at the junior college that I went to doing some like sports information stuff. And then the other was doing pitching instruction and strength training with some high school youth-aged kids at a facility called Diamond Sports Training Center. And so it kind of worked out really good because I had two part-time jobs where I could kind of figure out which direction I wanted to go from. And then after about 6 months to a year of that, I decided I wanted to kind of move on with the pitching and strength and conditioning stuff. And so I kind of dedicated myself more to that and eventually started studying for the CSCS and things like that.
Well, that's really interesting, and I want to pick your brain on that. But, you know, the way the world is now and the internet and there's more information available than ever before, it seems like a lot of people are, you know, taking interest in other things, and that's kind of the route that I'm taking. I've always been interested in being a baseball coach. I knew when I was young, whenever my playing days were over, I wanted to get into coaching. And then once I got out of coaching a few years ago, I've really taken an interest in just kind of the full athletic development. Yes, I'm still interested in working with catchers and getting those guys better. But I'm more interested in the nutrition and the strength training and the conditioning and the recovery and all those things that go along with it. And like you said, there are avenues that you can take now where people have an opportunity to learn. And that's honestly one of the reasons I've started this podcast, so I can reach out to guys like you and I can learn myself, but I can help share some of the information that you've gotten.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like that's really the biggest thing is like, like at Driveline, we put out a ton of content, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, or we write blog posts or do Driveline Plus videos and things like that. And there are so many different opportunities to learn. And, there's other people doing that. Eric Cressy's been putting out content for years. And that's really what got me into strength and conditioning. And a lot of the things that I learned kind of starting my coaching career, kind of all came from guys like Eric Cressy and Tony Gentilcore and things like that. And so, while being at a desk in school or reading textbooks and things like that is great, and the formality of that's really good, there are so many other opportunities to learn different things from people who actually are in the trenches working with athletes every day.
Absolutely. And I want to pick your brain on that too, because you mentioned something that I'm going through right now. Over the past year or so, I've kind of started to really get more of a formal education, I guess. So I've gone through a personal training course. I've gone through a nutrition coaching course, a performance enhancement specialization, and I'm studying right now to prepare for the CSCS exam. So what advice do you have for me as I try to go through that?
Whew, that's tough. Yeah. Especially for me, not having any education background in like the anatomy and physiology section. That was a real struggle for me. And I think it was a struggle just because there's so much information in there. And, early on in my career, I worked primarily with baseball players. And so everything that I read and everything that I'm learning is from people who also train baseball players. And I think there's so much stuff in there about training endurance athletes and things in that nature. And so, I guess as far as advice, somebody gave me the advice of reading the book backwards to kind of get a better understanding. And I also think just because the way the test is structured is it's opposite from the way you read it. So
interesting advice. I hadn't heard that before.
The material that you read last would be what you are going to test on first.
Sure.
Yeah, I read that textbook cover to cover twice. And it just kind of crushed a lot of practice quizzes.
Well, as somebody who's going through the process myself, I know it speaks highly of you without having an exercise science background and being able to dedicate yourself to study for it and learn the material. I know that means I know how much work you put into it, so I can definitely appreciate that. I do want to kind of get back and talk a little bit more about, we've kind of got your background and what you started, how you got going. But how did you get started with Driveline? These guys are known as probably some of the most innovative guys out there, if not the most innovative guys out there. And you're surrounded by a lot of very forward thinkers. How did you kind of position yourself to get on with Driveline?
Yeah, so like I said, I started out working at a company called Diamond Sports Training Center, which is about 30 minutes south of where we're located in Kent. I'm one of the few local guys who works on the training floor here. So it's been kind of cool to see the growth of Driveline, both from the outside and now from the inside. But basically how I got started was I worked primarily with youth and high school athletes, and I coached an 18-year-old team. And a lot of the guys who played on that 18-year-old team, or not a lot, there was like 3 or 4 of them, were some of like the original Driveline trainees. And so when I was coaching them, they kind of inspired us. We saw these athletes have these huge jumps in velocity. And so they inspired us at Diamond Sports to kind of start implementing our own weighted ball program. A lot of it inspired by what we do at Driveline now. And I met this guy, actually, I was just at the gym lifting myself, and I overheard him talking to somebody. It was during the MLB playoffs, and I just overheard him say, "Oh yeah, it's so crazy to see some of these guys on TV in the World Series because I played with them in the minor leagues." And so I introduced myself and I asked him, if he played in pro ball, and it turned out he was in his off season. He was still playing pro ball. It was Brandon Mann, who
wow.
there was some big stories about him last year. He made his major league debut with the Rangers at 34 years old. He's bounced around from independent ball to affiliate ball to he played in Japan professionally. He's back in Japan now. And so I kind of told him what I was doing down at Diamond Sports and, told him if he ever wanted to come check it out, he could. And so I ended up training him for like 1.5 off seasons. And his second off season, he was working with me. He needed to throw a bullpen, and the catcher who was catching his bullpens at the time was like, "Hey man, I'm going to Driveline to catch a bunch of the other pros. If you want to come down there and throw, like, you're more than welcome." So he goes down there, throws a bullpen, and like most guys who come here, just fell in love with the place. And he ended up texting me the next morning. He was like, "Hey man, like, I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna train at Driveline the rest of the off season." So it ended up working out because he started to tell the guys down here about me and was telling me how awesome it was and basically recruited me to come here. And so after a few conversations with Kyle Bodie and Mike Rathwell, we eventually kind of made it work, and I came on board here. I actually started as kind of a hybrid trainer between doing some pitching stuff, and I'd spend like the first half of my day on the pitching floor and then the second half of the day in the weight room. And then going into my first summer was kind of when I first transitioned into full time in the weight room. And I kind of wanted it to happen that way just because I feel like, at least from my perspective, I feel like I have like more of an impact in the weight room. Like on the throwing floor, like you're teaching the drills, but like in a sense, the program kind of works on its own. Like you teach the drills, and the idea is that the athletes do the drills and they do them at high intent and they repattern things. And I like kind of the challenge of working with athletes and figuring out, maybe why they move a certain way. And if there's a way that I can manipulate that movement in the weight room that might lead to quicker adaptations that lead to better movement on the throwing side. So it ended up working out pretty.
I think that's awesome. And I think one of the coolest things about your story is it seems like it just started because you were willing to go up and introduce yourself to someone and start a conversation. And, it's crazy what happens when you're open-minded and you meet people and you say hello and you kind of expand your network.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I've always been more introverted. And so like, it's very funny because like, my parents always say to me, like, if you would have told me when you were a kid that you would be like as social as you are now and like doing what you do, like interacting with people on a daily basis, like we would tell you you're full of shit.
Well, hey, there you go. But again, it says a lot about you, man. That's personal growth. That's how you grow and come out of your shell.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Really cool. But let's go ahead and get back down to the Driveline. So yeah, you guys work with a ton of phenomenal athletes at a lot of different levels, from the big leagues to guys who are younger and have aspirations to make it to the big leagues. But when somebody steps foot in Driveline for the first day number one, I'm assuming you put them through an assessment. What would their program look like on day number one when they first show up at Driveline?
Yeah, so day one, depending on if you're a pitcher or you're a hitter, day one is kind of the skill assessment day. So day one, they go through all the throwing drills. I'll just speak kind of on the pitching side because it's kind of primarily who I work with on the strength side.
No problem at all.
So day one, they'll go through all the pitching drills. They get video of all those drills, and then they do 3 to 5 throws from the mound in our biomechanics lab, markered up. And then day 2 is their strength assessment. And I'll kind of just preface this by saying that our strength assessment is kind of always evolving. Since I've been here for 2+ years, the strength assessment has changed completely, like 3 to 4 times, and then we've kind of added and subtracted from it 10+ times. So the biggest thing as far as the assessment goes is that we need to measure things that give us actionable data. So it has to either be something that impacts performance and that we know it impacts performance, or a predictor of injury. And then the other thing is, if I'm measuring it, I have to be able to manipulate it somehow in the weight room to correct it or improve it somehow. So we look at range of motion on the table, in the shoulder joint and the hip joint. We look at things like T-spine rotation, ankle dorsiflexion. And so we're getting manual shoulder strength. We look at those things. And then as far as the strength testing goes, it's all based off of velocity-based training. So the process is we take the athlete's height and weight, and then these numbers are pretty arbitrary, but we basically predict what an elite 1-rep max would be for that athlete's height and weight. And then we test at 30, 40, 50, and 60% of that. That kind of gives us an idea of where they fall on kind of the VBT continuum of that 30% rep is kind of right in that starting strength velocity range. The 40% is kind of at the top or bottom to like middle ground of speed strength. The 50% is right in that strength speed, and then the 60% is kind of right in that like border of like accelerative strength and strength speed. So we're looking to get two different questions answered. Number one, is this athlete's strength sufficient? And like that can be argued because like nobody really knows like how strong is strong enough. And like I said, the numbers are pretty arbitrary, but hopefully once we get enough data, we can kind of figure out, how strong is strong enough, or at least what a educated guess of how strong is strong enough. And so we want to find out, are they strong enough to basically find out if their strength is proficient enough to go into high intent throwing. And then the other thing that we want to get answered is, kind of where do they fall on that speed strength spectrum? Are they more strength based? Are they more speed based? And then basically, how can we take that information and use it to program to help bring guys closer to the center of that?
So you're building a program individually for a guy based on his assessment and his needs, right?
Yeah. So the idea is that we take some of the range of motion deficiencies, and granted, there's going to be certain things on the range of motion side that like we're going to correct for no matter what, like just because of the demands of the sport, like overhead flexion. Like naturally, the more that you throw, the less overhead range of motion you're going to have. It just puts a ton of stress on the shoulder. And so those are things we're going to constantly work on. But things like hip range of motion or ankle range of motion or T-spine, those are things that like based on how they score in the assessment, these are things that, we're going to program for in the warm-up to hopefully help get them to a quote-unquote more kind of neutral position. And get them moving better, and then they'll go into the strength program, which is designed based on does this athlete need to just get stronger? Does this athlete need to move quicker, focus more on rate of force development? The other information it can give us is like a lot of times when an athlete is very good at the speed stuff and not as good at the strength stuff, it tells us that like they probably could benefit from more like eccentric overload work. Basically, like they are very good at moving quickly, but they need like that extra tension to help kind of aid in getting them to be even more explosive.
Man, I really like that. Obviously you guys are doing a phenomenal job and taking an approach like that where it's tailored to each individual's player's needs. They're definitely going to have a lot more success that way than putting them in a cookie cutter program. Another thing that I really took away from that I like to hear is you talk about how much the assessment has changed since you've been there just for a few years. I think that's where for a long time baseball really lacked. It was a lot of guys kind of just, we're going to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. But you guys seem to be changing things and adapting, every couple of months it sounds like, and adding things in that you find are relevant and taking things away that are maybe less relevant. And that, if I had to guess, I would say that's one of the reasons that you guys are so successful, because you are willing to adapt and you're willing to change and you're willing to find whatever works best for your guys.
Yeah, it's a big challenge because a lot of times science will tell us that what we've been doing isn't working, and so what we'll do is if somebody has a proposal to add it or take something away from the assessment, we have to figure out if that matters, and so we have a quantitative analyst on staff here, and so it's really nice because I can tell him, hey, I need you to take the range of motion assessment of all of these athletes and run it against the biomechanics report. Tell me if any of it matches up, or run it against, the stress put on the shoulder or the stress put on the elbow during the throw, and like tell me if any of it matters. And so a lot of times we find out that like what we're testing doesn't really matter all that much, and so there's no point in continuing to test it.
Right. So
yeah.
over the past couple of years, as you've kind of gone down this track and you've gotten more in the science world or the evidence-based world, what are some things that you've noticed or you've recognized maybe that the way baseball players used to train is not necessarily the way they should train, and maybe what we thought used to matter doesn't matter as much?
Yeah, I think that slowly. I mean, the pendulum always swings to it's always going to swing to drastically on the opposite side. But I think that very slowly we're starting to, and I'm guilty of this as well. Like, I know early on in my career, I trained athletes to not hurt them. And I think that we're starting to get a little bit more, I guess, for lack of a better term, like aggressive in the way that we're training athletes. And like, we have to understand that stress, especially in the weight room, is a good thing. And that we need to stress athletes in areas that they're going to be stressed when they play. Like, that's the only way to really prepare them for their sport or their event or whatever they may be doing. And so, I'm very vocal about the bench press and kind of how I think it benefits baseball players. And I think that that's something that hopefully more people will start to accept. And obviously it has its benefits for the right population at the right time of year. But I think just in general, we're starting to move towards, allowing baseball players to lift heavy. And I think it's so funny that has ever been considered a bad thing in the past, that lifting heavy is bad.
Yeah, it seems like that went around for a while. You had to stick to lightweight, don't do any overhead exercises. There's a lot of, I don't know if they're myths we'd call them, but there's a lot of folklore out there that people sometimes just don't know what to believe. And there's a lot of people talking, whether it be on the internet or on social media or wherever, and it's hard for people kind of to decipher what's good information and what's bad information. So we definitely need more guys like you who are continuing to put out good information and help guys out. With that said, what are your thoughts on, I'd love to hear you go a little bit more in detail about how you think going heavy is beneficial and more of your thoughts on the bench press, for example.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing there is like, if we think about the muscles that we're targeting with the bench press, the pec, the anterior delt, the lat does a lot of stabilization in the movement. Like, those are three very big muscles that work to internally rotate the shoulder. The shoulder internally rotates at an average of like 4,200 degrees per second, which is the fastest movement in sports. And we're afraid to lift those muscles that, I don't want to say afraid, but we're hesitant to have.
I think that's fair to say. I think a lot of people are afraid.
Yeah. I mean, we're hesitant to allow athletes to load those muscles with heavy weight. And like, like a lot of people will talk about alternatives to bench press of, like a landmine press or a half kneeling kettlebell press. And my argument to them is like, well, how heavy can you load those? What's the heaviest landmine press you've seen? And like, I program landmine presses a lot as accessory movement because I think they're a great tool. But how heavy can you load those to make that your primary upper body pressing exercise? It's just not even comparable.
Right. Yeah.
And like, chances are, if you have an athlete who can load it very heavy, chances are he also can load a bench press pretty heavy. And if he can load a bench press heavy, then he can start to work on rate of force development with the bench press and start to move it quickly. And I think like there's just benefits there that people are missing out on. I think that obviously, like I said, the shoulder takes a ton of stress in the throwing delivery, and people have used that reasoning too of, well, their shoulder's already taken a lot of stress, and I don't want to put more stress on it. And that's where kind of the timing of year comes into play. If I'm going to stress the shoulder, I'm going to stress it at a time where the throwing shoulder is maybe being stressed less as far as the throwing program goes. And so that's where like the integration piece comes into play.
And I think that makes sense. And, it makes sense from a common sense standpoint, but also a coaching standpoint as well. You have to be smart about what time of year you're putting the most load on these athletes and whatnot. And I'm glad you brought up the bench press because from what I know about, your program, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like a lot of it is built kind of on the big three, the bench, the deadlift, and the squat. How do the other two big lifts fit into your program, and how much do guys deadlift and squat, when they're at Driveline?
Yeah, so I would say it's very dependent on the athlete's strength levels, but for the most part, most of our athletes, if they're lifting 3 times a week, it's kind of designed around one day is your main lift is a squat, one day your main lift is a bench, and one day your main lift is deadlift. I think when I first got here, we did a lot of conventional deadlifts, and we've kind of transitioned into more of trap bar deadlifts, and I think that's just kind of for like ease of coaching of if, we're at capacity, our capacity is 110 pitchers and 30 to 40 hitters. So that's a lot of people coming through during the day. And it's just much easier to teach a trap bar deadlift.
It seems like that's what most people are going to. And, just watching guys online, it seems like most of the guys who are training athletes are switching from, conventional to trap bar.
Yeah, and we talk about a sport like baseball that puts a ton of stress on the spine already. There's a lot of research out there that shows that the trap bar deadlift has a little bit less activation like the erector spinae, and so if we can take a little bit of stress off the spine, that's a good thing. Just because all the rotating we're doing, whether we're pitching, whether we're hitting, if we can take some stress off the spine, that's a really good thing. And so I would say most of the guys have those 3 lifts in their program for a majority of the time that they're there. I would say if there's one that I kind of move away from, it's probably the squat. And I think that that's just because kind of as guys progress through their program, their throwing is going from basically general to specific, as in like they're either moving from an on-ramp to a velocity building phase to a mound blending phase to a competition phase. And so when we're in that mound blending phase and competition phase, especially when we're talking about training, I tend to start to gravitate more towards single leg exercises, Bulgarian split squats, reverse lunges, normal split squats, things like that, that I think potentially have a little bit more carryover, and also because the load is going to be less than a back squat or a front squat, again, putting a little bit less stress on the spine.
And would you take this? I know everything's individualized, but is that going to be an approach for many different age guys? Like I said, I know you're working with some guys in high school and you're working with some guys who are in the big leagues. But is that going to be a pretty standard progression?
I would say depending on like the younger guys, depending on their experience level, they might actually start with more of like a single leg approach and then go into kind of a general approach of, once I feel that they are ready to like load a back squat or load a front squat, move into that. And then it might just take a little bit of a detour, but eventually they're going to kind of end up in that same area.
That makes sense. And I want to stay on the topic of the younger guys for just a couple minutes. As you watch these guys and as you've been working with them for the past number of years, what are some things that you think the younger guys, maybe do incorrectly, or they have, I don't know if bad information is the right way to put it, but they've been doing incorrectly or wrong, or maybe they've been practicing the wrong things. What are some of those things that you see as guys come into you for the first time?
I think one of the bigger things is like prioritizing load over movement. And I think a lot of that is kind of like ego driven. I've noticed like a lot with our younger guys, like they're very hesitant to put a plate on the bar that's less than a 45, whether they're, squatting, benching, whatever it might be. But kind of just prioritizing the load over the movement. And you can spot it out right away when they come in for their assessment. You have guys who won't hit depth on their squat and the VBT testing and things like that, or their technique is just really bad, but then they tell you that they have a really good 1 rep max, and it's like, well, you probably have a really good half squat 1 rep max.
Yeah. It seems like every couple of days on Twitter, I see a video posted of some high school athlete that looks like he's about to break his back or about to snap in two. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. So and I think that's one thing that I really like about our strength assessment is that it's based on the bar velocities. And so you can't really cheat it. And so like, if I watch an athlete do a half squat, and then I tell him to get to depth, and then he gets the depth, and he moves the bar, and the velocity is slow, it's very easy to say, like, hey, actually, you're very weak, and we need to clean up that technique a little bit. So I would say, like, prioritizing load over movement, because in reality, like, while I talk about lifting heavy, the load doesn't mean anything if the movement's not efficient. So, like, hammering down efficient movement and like proficiency and like the basics is going to make it much easier to load the bar heavier when you start to add strength.
I think that's kind of a twofold aspect. I think part of it's ego. I think we're all men. We're trying to lift as much weight as we can. We want to be the strongest guy in the weight room. There's no doubt about that. But I also think that a lot of high schools just don't have access to a real strength coach, somebody's got a background and can, really critique the form and maybe write a great program out. So I definitely think some of it's ego, and I think there's a mixture in there as well of just not having the proper programming done, which kind of brings me to one of the other points that I wanted to speak with you about. As I know you talked about having the capacity of the number of pitchers and position players that can be there at one time, but you guys also do remote training, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we have two different types of remote training. We have basically athletes that have come here and then leave and then go on to remote training, and then we have athletes who have never been here. And the programs are going to be a little bit different, obviously. The athletes who have been here have a little bit better understanding of how things work, but yeah, we have two different types of remote.
Well, I think that makes sense as somebody who's just in the sports world. If you have a son or a daughter and you want to give them the best opportunity available, you want to send them to the brightest and smartest people out there. So there's a lot of people across the country that are sending their kids. Maybe they can't send them, to the Seattle area or the Kent area, but they can, sign them up for a program. They can train remotely. So when you train guys remotely, do you do a lot of video analysis? Do they check in with you? I'm just kind of curious how that works. If somebody were interested in signing up, what would the approach and what would the process be like?
Yeah, hopefully. So we have our BBT device that we're in the process of putting out on the market. Hopefully, once that is out there and people have access to that, the plan is to make a VBT device that is affordable to the average Joe. Like the Tendo and GymAware are well over $2,000, and the idea is that our online trainees can purchase this device, and hopefully we can roll out a more formal assessment process with that as far as the online training goes. But in the past, we've had athletes film like the 3 big lifts. So we'll do like squat, deadlift, bench. They'll film like a push-up. They'll film a lunge and send that in, and we can give them some feedback on that. But for the most part, a lot of the programming we do on the strength side for remote trainees is for the trainees that have already been here. So we have a pretty good idea of how they move in general. So a lot of it is just kind of a programming thing. But yeah, like I said, hopefully once we get the VBT device rolling, we can roll out a little bit more of a formal process with that.
And just to clear it up for the listeners who maybe don't know exactly what it is, the VBT, the velocity-based training, that's going to be, I hate to say a gizmo or a gadget, but something you attach to the bar that tells you the velocity of how quickly the bar is moving, correct?
Yep.
I'm with you. I've seen those before, and I know they're definitely not affordable for the average person or the average high school gym. So I'll be watching it as that comes out, and I think I've seen Kyle tweet maybe a teaser, or maybe it was in an email. I know you guys have it in development, so definitely looking forward to watching for that coming in the future. With the remote training, I would imagine there are some challenges that come with it for guys that play different times a year. Just the amateur baseball season now, it seems to be very, very long. You play your high school let's say you have a long summer ball. Now you're playing tournaments in the fall to try to get exposure. You may have a short off season in the winter, but a lot of times you're bearing down to the weight room and you're trying to grow or you're trying to get stronger. And then your high school season starts, and it just seems like it's a year-long program. How would you kind of recommend that people break down, their year, or how much time should someone take off, or what should they do as far as a yearly calendar goes?
Yeah, I think, and especially having some experience coaching youth teams, there's a lot of games. You talk about a high school season where you could play anywhere from 20 to 30 games, and I want to say when I coached an 18-year-old team, I want to say we played anywhere from 50 to 60 games, depending on how far we made it in tournaments and things like that. And that's a lot of games for a youth athlete to play. And I think that from September to February is such an important time for development, whether it's developing your skills or developing, strength in the weight room. And, there's all these colleges or all of these programs who are holding prospect camps or showcase tournaments and stuff during those months. And I think it's just it's a huge disservice to the athletes. I've heard of many athletes where they're like, oh yeah, this school's really interested in me. They told me I should go to their prospect camp. And it's it's very clearly money driven if that's the case. If you're really interested in an athlete, you can have him come on a campus tour, or you can go watch him play for free. I think the only exception is maybe guys who have gotten much better from their junior year to senior year. And so these seniors need to get seen by college coaches in the fall. But I think as far as taking time off, we typically recommend anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks off completely from throwing. And the reality is that the worse that you are, or the more velocity that you need, the less time you should take off from throwing. And that's always very dependent on, what's causing your velocity to be down. Because a lot of times it could be purely a strength thing where it's hey, maybe shutting down from throwing and focusing on your strength work should be your priority right now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would add to that is that, speaking from conversations I've had with Terry Phillips, our PT on staff here, you guys should take at least a month off from rotating every year. Youth athletes don't have the strength or the core stability to have their spine hold up for the amount of rotating they're doing, especially with all of the, indoor facilities who are having their guys practice 2-3 times a week from September to February, and then playing from February to August, and basically rotating year round. These kids need at least a month off from rotating every year to spend that time on developing their strength so that they can withstand the demands of rotating.
That's an interesting point. I've thought a lot about taking time off. I hadn't necessarily thought about it specifically as far as the rotation goes. But one of my good friends has a son who's in high school, and I want to say this is his sophomore year. He basically took the fall off to try to improve. This is his freshman year, to take the fall off to try to improve his body. And he, at that age, when he got on a proper nutrition program and he was in a proper training environment that was structured and well written, he became a completely different athlete. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure on these guys that maybe they want to, they know it'd be best for them that if I weigh 145 right now, I'd be a lot better athlete if I weighed 165. But they feel like they have to go to these showcases or these camps, they have to play in these tournaments. And that's a shame, but I do feel like I see more people that are doing that now. So I think we're moving in the right direction there, because amateur baseball, man, the season is so long. I love personally when I see guys that have a focus and they know they need to improve their athleticism or strength or size or whatever it may be, and they actually are able to develop and devote time to it and then really improve from it.
Right, and it's such we talk about these high school years, these are crucial years for developing these athletes' bodies. Literally, if you're talking about a 150-pound high school athlete, they're literally going to, well, not literally, but they're gonna get stronger from looking at a weight. This time is just so crucial for these athletes, and I think the funny thing about like them feeling like they need to play in these showcases or need to play in these games so they get seen by colleges or whatever is that they don't understand that they're doing themselves more harm than good by rushing the process of being seen by college coaches. If you're a 140-pound college or 140-pound high school athlete, and you go perform and throw 75 miles per hour at a showcase, like you just got crossed off the school's list. Now, if you take that time and you train and then you show out in the spring, now they're going to see some potential in you, and they're going to keep an eye on you as you progress through your career.
Yeah, man, I'm with you completely. Like I said, I think there's a lot of guys that could benefit from taking time off. I say time off from playing or showcasing, and really spending the time trying to develop their athleticism or strength or power or whatever it may be. So that's definitely an interesting topic that I'm kind of curious to see how the sports world goes over these next couple of years. For guys like that, for guys that are in high school and they want to get stronger, but they are playing all the time. I know you said a lot of your guys are programmed around 3 days a week. What advice do you have for a high school kid or a high school player who maybe, he's not been around a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who have the background maybe, if they're trying to do some of this on their own, what would be some advice or maybe some tips you'd give them so they can kind of maximize their time?
Yeah, I would say, and this is a challenge we face too. Obviously, we're strength and conditioning coaches for like their athletes, like their sport is obviously the priority. And so a big challenge we face is like figuring out how to do more with less. And so I would say the same thing, like figure out, what the big rocks are, like where like the lowest hanging fruit is, and like do that. So like don't, especially if you're a high school athlete who needs to gain strength, don't mess around with the fancy accessory movements. Get very good at the basics. And then like I know you sit on your own, but I think the biggest thing is like get a coach. Like, get somebody who knows what they're doing, whether it's just somebody who's writing you a program or going over some video. Like get a coach, because these athletes need the structure. They don't know how to write I didn't know how to write a program until I was, a year or two into my career. Like they don't know how, like now we're expecting these high school kids to do this on their own, or, dads or teachers or things like that to figure it out. And yes, there's a lot of information out there, but if you hire a coach or you pay somebody to do it for you, you're going to see a much, much bigger benefit.
I'm a huge believer in that, and I've said it 100 times before. It's the same reason Tiger Woods has a swing coach. When Tiger Woods, I know he's kind of making a comeback now, but when he was in his heyday years ago, he still had a swing coach. He's the best player in the world, but he has somebody watching and critiquing his swing. For me personally, I like to consult with somebody about my nutrition and my health. I think it's good to bounce ideas around. I think everybody who is able to should definitely go that route. It's just nice to be able to have someone who is focused on you, someone who is dedicated, and someone has a trained eye that can watch you and watch you progress, and then make the adjustments as necessary as well. That's probably one of the big keys, I think, too.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing, you'll see it on social media all the time too, like is the saying of like strength coaches need strength coaches too. Like I cannot write myself a program. I'm terrible at it. And so a lot of times you find somebody else in your industry, whether it's, somebody I work with here at Driveline, or, I'll reach out to somebody who I follow and respect on social media and like pay them to write me a program. Like, so it's
money well spent, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
So interesting, very interesting. I want to ask you one more thing, then we'll let you get off here in a few minutes. But how does the nutrition play into the development of your athletes? I don't know if you guys help them out with nutrition or if you've got any thoughts on that. I personally feel like nutrition is one of the most important aspects. It's just important to me. I feel like the way your body heals and repairs and rebuilds is mostly dictated by your nutrition. Obviously, there's got to be a stress or a stimulus to cause that, but putting the right things in your body is very, very important. And I feel like that's one area where, even I say young guys, even older guys, just aren't very well versed on it or don't have the right knowledge. Do y'all stress the nutrition side of it much? Or if you do, maybe you have somebody in house, or maybe you refer out to people?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're trying to get better at. I think there are people out there who are very good about like having a very large network of people they can refer out to. And we have a couple employees right now who are working hard on like building that network of people we can refer out to. As far as kind of what we do for it is we have a very basic kind of template that we give to athletes. That basically you enter their height, weight, and kind of like their goal as far as like they want to maintain, do they want to gain, do they want to lose, things like that. And then it will spit out kind of just like recommended calories, macros, things like that. But yeah, we're working really hard to kind of figure out a better process of doing that. Because like you said, it is super important, and it's one of those things too that like gets overlooked quite a bit when we talk about performance. You know, we're always trying to think of you know, what did we do programming wise that might have caused this dip in performance or this increase in performance, but it could be something as simple as nutrition or sleep, or just they're not stressed as much. So yeah, it's definitely something we're working to get better at.
Well, I'm interested to see where that goes with you guys, knowing Mike and knowing Kyle. And I know they've probably got something in the works that'll be a phenomenal tool that players can use all over the place. But really interesting. You know, I said that was the last thing. I have one more question for you before I let you get off here. What would be some of the differences you've noticed between some of the really high-level elite performers versus some of the guys who I hate to say remain average, but maybe don't make it to those elite levels, whether it be their dedication to the weight room or their ethic, the way they go about their business? What would be some of the differences you think are between, you know, the best of the best and everybody else?
Yeah, I think you can look at this question kind of two different ways of like what makes the athletes good, and then like what makes the athletes good trainees. And I think they kind of go hand in hand together, but there's definitely a difference. I think like number one, like what makes athletes good is that like they're generally like pretty good at everything across the board, but nothing is like stands off, like jumps off the paper to you. Like they're just like good at everything. You know, like they're strong, they can jump, they can move well, like they're just good at everything. And then as far as like what makes athletes good trainees, I think like the best players don't need a ton of coaching. They need like a little bit of direction, and then like they can figure it out from there. I think the people that come here and don't maybe see the results that they want to see are likely the athletes who think they need a lot more one-on-one attention. And then the other thing is like they understand how to manage workload. We have a lot of athletes who will come here and they'll do their normal training. They'll throw, they'll lift, they'll do their recovery stuff, and then they'll go home and then they'll go to LA Fitness and they'll do more ab work or more sprint work, or they just think they need more work. And I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword, because they're doing more work because they're not as good, and they think that more work is going to get them there faster. But in reality, like you making changes is a long process, and unfortunately, sometimes you just have to kind of stick to that process. And then I think the last thing I'll say is that, you know, there's two types of good trainees. There's the trainees who kind of want to have input in their programming, and then there's the trainees that kind of just want you to give them a program and they're going to do it to a T. And one is not better than the other, but I think that like the athletes who want to have input in their program, the good ones still respect your opinion and understand if you don't maybe want to agree or go through with the input that they're trying to give. And so I think like athletes have to understand that, you know, we are professionals and they're paying us for our expertise, and they need to just trust that. And I think kind of going back to like the people thinking more is better is like, if I thought that you needed ab work or sprint work or, you know, direct arm work or anything like that, like I would have programmed it to begin with. I'm not holding anything back for you.
Man, I love that answer. I think, you hit on a lot of good things, but like you said, I found that too. I think the best athletes are the ones who can coach themselves. They have enough self-awareness or body IQ to kind of know what's going on in their body and kind of figure out what they need. And yes, that you definitely need coaches around to help you figure out the process, but they have enough awareness to know what to do and what not to do versus the guy, like you said, who has good intentions of wanting to get the extra work in, but good intentions aren't necessarily what does it. It's not necessarily smart programming to go out and get a second workout in after you've already been through one at the gym already.
Well, and the thing there too is I actually had this conversation with an athlete a couple of weeks ago. It's at the end of our assessment process, we'll sit down with the athletes and kind of go over their all the data we've collected from their assessment, and then we'll kind of map out a plan. And one of the things that we ask them is, what were you doing prior to coming here? So we can kind of get an idea of what their training was like before. And I had one athlete say, yeah, I kind of got obsessed with lifting, and I was lifting 6 days a week. And just recently I switched to 3 days a week, and I saw much better results. And so, people have to understand that the body needs to recover. And the other thing there is that, like, if you want to lift or you want to train 6 times a week, like, you're probably not training hard enough in your sessions. Like, you should train hard enough in those 3 to 4 times per week that you don't want to train anymore, because you worked hard enough in those sessions that you're sore or you're tired or you just don't want to do it anymore.
Absolutely. It's a fine balance for athletes. Like I said, a lot of guys have good intentions, but a lot bigger part of it is being smart about what you do. So, man, that was awesome. I really appreciate your time, Kyle. A lot of really good information. I know you're at Driveline. I know you're active on Twitter, but for the people that wanted to learn more about you and what you're doing, where would be a good place for them to find out?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter, and it is I believe it's at Kyle Rogers 18. And then on Instagram, it's going to be at KLRogers28. And Rogers is ROGERS, no D in there.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes so guys can find you and know where you are. We'll also link to your website as well. But Kyle, once again, just want to say thanks for coming on. Really appreciate spending the time with us and kind of letting us know what you do at Driveline and how you train athletes in one of the most respected facilities in the world when it comes to baseball training. So Kyle, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Train with Zan podcast,
where our goal is to help you look, feel, and perform like an athlete.
Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening and follow Zan on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
The training doesn't have to stop here. For today's show notes and more information about training, nutrition, and fitness,
head on over to trainwithxan.com and join the team.